Okay, folks, well, great to see everybody on this Memorial Weekend. So we need to get started. I'm very pleased to introduce the Reverend Rivka Gewurz, who is a Dean of Academics at the Chaplaincy, oh, that's hard to say, the Chaplaincy Institute, and she's a spiritual director and officiant in the Shelter for the Spirit. She's also a longtime Portland resident, no stranger to Westminster. She's worked in the welcoming, the
Community of Welcoming
the
Congregation.
Community of Welcoming Committee. So Congregation. Thanks. So without any further ado, we're going to hear about widening our welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this sunny holiday morning. So we're going to do a variety of things this morning. Some of it's going to require us to get up and move around a little bit. Some of it's going to invite us to look into our own experience. And the focus is not just how do we widen our welcome, but what gets in the way of doing that? When do we make people fit in as opposed to get to belong? And so that's a big focus for our time together. So you notice I had you all get these little, pseudo name tags, right? I'm going to ask you to do something. I'm going to ask you to get out of your seats here in a second and organize yourself. I'm not going to tell you how to organize yourself. Which of these tags do you have an affinity to? We're going to do this a couple of times in a couple of different ways, and then we'll talk about what this is about. So take a moment, look around, see who is in your tribe that you want to go stand by. And we can make a couple of little jumbly sections here. All right. Okay. Right. I like it. Let's stand by them. They're hard. Yeah. Hello. So just take a moment. Take a moment and see who you'll all stand by. Okay. So now I'm going to have you stop for a second. And I want you to reorganize yourself. What is it? What is another tribe that you belong to? So we're going to do this one more time and look around. What's the symbol, the color, the draw to someone else?
There we go. I think my yellow ought to go with pink.
Okay. Hey, we're coming. There's no big. Yeah. Okay. Take a look again and just notice who you're with, and then come back to your seats. So what do you think that was about? Choosing to be with people who are like you. We all have unconscious bias. Sometimes it's called unconscious bias, sometimes it's called implicit bias. But there's no thought through reason why we gravitate to one group or another group. But that reality affects how we move through the world. Let's go ahead and start the next. So we all have multiple social identities, social locations. They're things that we see about somebody and we can say, oh, that person's tall, or that person is wearing a hijab, or that person is differently abled. The things that we see. But there are also things about us that we don't see. There's things like what our placement is in our family of origin, where we're from, what culture we have, particularly for those of us who present as white-bodied folk, because we're enculturated to think white is just a race. But each of us comes from someplace, just as people from India come from someplace, just as Native American people come from someplace, just as Africans come from someplace. But those of us who've been enculturated to think of white as a race have kind of gotten amnesia about all of the different cultural things that are underneath the reality of our lives. You know, my social locations are, I am a bisexual woman who is cisgendered, who is married to a trans man, mother of a non-binary young adult, who has poor German Catholic origins and married into an upper middle class Jewish family. All of those things influence who I am.
God bless.
All of those things influence who I am. But there are other things that influence who we are. For instance, my career change from being an actress in the early 80s, running to New York, only to become engaged in the most horrific pandemic we've ever known, and that was the AIDS pandemic. That completely changed my career. It brought me into interfaith ministry because I had the great pleasure and privilege to work alongside other clergy from multiple religions who stood up to the call of being the ones who held the hands when nobody else would, being the ones who would advocate for and create homes and places of safety. That impacts all of my decisions since then. And that's the reality. Let's go ahead and change the screen. So one area that we all experience, regardless of our orientation or our gender, is we live in embodied containers. And, you know, that used to be, you know, the old Kinsey paradigm was you've got this, you know, linear idea of male on one side, female on the other side. You've got this idea of heterosexual on one side, queer on the other side. And that's not true. There are so many other aspects that fit into who we are as a gendered and sexual individual that impacts not just those of us who are queer. It impacts every single one of us, because who here was defined as a tomboy when they were a child? And who here was told they threw like a girl?
I still do.
Yeah.
Probably not.
The reality is our gender presentation, our ways that we move in the world, our identities are composite. None of us are on this one end. We're a mix of things. So yes, I'm a cisgendered female. And many people would assume that I'm somebody's grandma, and I am. They would also make assumptions about me because I'm an old lady with a cane. All of these things go into how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive each other. The current administration would have us believe that everyone is male or female. there are as many intersex people as there are redheads. And you can't necessarily tell somebody is intersexed by looking at them. There are some people who, by sheer chance, find out when they're in their 30s or 40s that, oh, the reason we can't conceive a child is because I'm not an XX or an XY, I'm an XXY or an XYY. I may have an exterior that appears to be masculine, but I have ovaries inside my body. And the opposite is true too, of people who present as female, who have undescended testes inside. We are a composite and a tapestry of lived ways of being. You know, one of the things that is a rather radical way of thinking about this is if you go back to Genesis 1, the Ha'adam, the human, was in as early as 2000 years ago in the Talmud, understood to be an intersexed person. There are actually 6 different genders in the Talmud that recognizes that we all come in different packages and how we navigate that. Yes, there are the normatives that is the dominant culture, but the divine created us as miracles, each and every one of us, in unique ways. Unfortunately, the world doesn't always recognize all of our differences. So I'm going to ask you now to turn to the person next to you for about 5 minutes and take a look at all of these identities. Which ones speak to you? Which ones speak to your experience? What jumps out at you? So like I said, we'll take 5 minutes and just take a moment and think about, how do you identify? Regardless of how you've been told to identify, which are the pieces that speak to your lived experience? It could be triads if not.
So what are you listening to us? Still thinking about it. Okay, like go there. So I would say that, I actually think that something has on these. Sure. So now, as a born female, I think I tried to as their baby. But I do think, emotional. That it's, I'm not in the aspect of third in the middle. So like, in the middle. Yeah. But whatever. Middle.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like you do. Multiple.
Yeah.
Play the side. And then it all probably about some of the.
It's hard to use.
Okay, should we move this a little closer here? They're having a hard time hearing.
I can see more than women, because some are, and emotional. It is.
Thanks for the,
Yes.
take just 1 more minute and finish up your conversation.
So identify.
Okay, let's come to a conclusion of the conversations. What did that arise for you? What new awarenesses about yourself or about people in your lives did that make clearer to you or make you more curious? Yes.
I'd say that it varies over time.
Mhm.
That, when I was a child, I made assumptions about myself, male, small, things like that. But as time went by and my life experiences changed or expanded, I was able to make room for the different, say, gender expression.
Mhm.
Is that?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
One thing that I noticed about after kind of going through that list is that I think I go through my life paying more attention to what makes me different than what makes me similar. And when I look at all of these, there's actually more that makes me similar than different. Which means by focusing on my own differences, that creates a blindness to my own privileges.
That's right. Yes. Yeah. We're talking in a minute about privilege and oppression, so that's a good lead in. Any other observations before we move into the next piece? Yes.
I think there are some people, I mean, it's asexual, so it's how they participate in relationships with other people. And I didn't know where that really kind of fit on that board type of stuff. Some people have stronger attractions to certain traits, and other people certain attractions to certain expression and how people express themselves and stuff.
right.
So, I mean, I think there's another tier there.
Right. Absolutely. And even within that tier, some people might be aromantic, but still engage in sexual activities. Others may be uncomfortable with any kind of sexual expression, and yet they develop really tight bonds with people of their own gender or maybe of a different gender. When my husband was 5 years old, he marched into his parents' bedroom and announced, "My name is Tom Cowboy." To which his parents said, "Lauren Ann, go put on a dress." He was taught to be diminutive, taught to be ladylike. And that became increasingly hard over his lifetime. For the first half of his adult life, he assumed that that meant he was just an androgynous dyke. But even that expression, that gender expression, became limiting for him because of people's expectations, because he still appeared as a diminutive little lady. It wasn't until he turned 50 that he gave himself permission to claim his full identity and to transition into the man he'd always known himself to be. Our adult child recognized in their teens that they were neither male nor female, that they were non-binary. And because their gender presentation leans towards the assigned female at birth persona that everyone, including ourselves, assumed, they continue for years to get misgendered, to the point where they chose to have surgical modifications to their body so that people wouldn't see breasts and make assumptions about who they were. Some people wish that they could have surgeries, but cannot. And all of that goes into the matrix of what we call the matrix of oppression. We have different ways of being in the world, and we run up against stuff in our dominant culture. Our culture, by design, has been heteronormative, has been white supremacist, even though none of us claim to be, well, right now there are more people who are claiming to be, but even though most of us recognize that is not how God wanted us to be in relationship with other human beings. So what ends up happening is you've got a privileged group and an oppressed group. But it's never that simple, because just because one person might be heteronormative, they may have other areas of oppression in their life, whether that's because they're queer, whether that's because they're BIPOC, which is, you know, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, for those who don't know what the acronym stands for. They may have multiples of those. You know, when I am at my seminary and I'm talking to my chaplaincy students, one of the things I remind people is that when they're sitting with, you know, a young Black trans man in a prison, his life experience is going to be very different than the life experience of themselves or of other people they serve. When they're sitting at bedside with a Hispanic old woman, they have to keep in mind that maybe the reason nobody's coming to visit is because they're afraid of ICE coming and getting them at bedside. These are the things that we don't see. So when we go back to that tree, and sometimes it's presented as a iceberg, there are the things that we see about somebody, and there are the things that we have no clue what's going on in their lives, that are influenced by the ways that power and privilege and oppression intermingle and intersect in intersecting ways. Let's go to the next slide. So one of the things we don't think about is the ways that we're enculturated around all of these things. Somebody, you know, some doctor says, it's a baby girl. And so we begin enculturating that child into the ways that our family, our congregation, our community says that that baby girl should be living life. But what happens if in that socialization, there are then institutions that say, oh, you're a girl, you're not allowed to participate in this sport. Oh, you're a girl, we're getting ready to pass the SAVE Act. So you better not have changed your name when you got married, even though we told you to change your name when you got married, because now you're not going to be able to vote, because your last name is no longer what your birth last name was. So we have these systems that come into place, our socialization, our institutions that help create the containers of what we think the norm should be in our lives. But what happens is when people are outside of those norms, they then run into conflict, because the more we try and enforce those norms, the harder it is for somebody to be their whole sacred self. We create institutions, we create oppressions. Some of those oppressions are things that we don't even realize are in play. Let's start the video.
Everyone, Liberate, activist, cultural worker, and disability justice advocate. Race and disability, race and gender, race and class. I can't go to a store or a doctor's office or a date and not be seen as brown, trans, there's no way. And I'm not gonna choose any of those things. I do not want to minimize or dictate how people live and experience and identify. Intersectionality is really super critical to me. I'm not just attacked because I'm trans, I'm attacked because I'm brown and I'm disabled. People are being imprisoned, criminalized, harmed, not given jobs, not given medical support. They're not adequately being loved. Critical that we get those resources. And it's critical that we get those resources from that community. Every day I'll be on a train and someone will, try to get a seat at the, disability access seating. And depending on that person, depending on how they see me and my masculinity, right? Brown masculinity is not supposed to be vulnerable. Gender nonconformity, are you a queer girl? And then I'm young, so you're not really disabled. So all of these things are coming into play on a frequent basis. And that happens when I'm at the medical office. I'm with the doctor, how many times I'm misgendered? So if they see my brownness, we just want to talk about your brownness. When I'm in like queer spaces, like let's just talk about you being transgender or queer. When I'm in very able-bodied, fit, radical people of color spaces, they don't really want to discuss access or the needs of my community being disabled. Real talk, white people are treated very different in the trans community than brown people, than Black people, than Latino people. Real talk, people with disabilities, oftentimes it's a lot of white people, cisexual, rich people who can afford help. And that is not my community. For me, what's super pivotal is to acknowledge that race doesn't just move everything along, but that it interprets and informs all the other parts. It's because somebody is brown and trans. It is because somebody is physically disabled or perceived as crazy, right? And brown and Black. And those things inform each other. When somebody says, oh, that trans person of color is so lazy, they don't know how to get a job. Well, A, that's ableism, they think it can't work. E, is sexism, and C, anti-Blackness is racism, right? So all those things are tools, are weapons simultaneously on me, on you. I think it's really critical that we engage in dialogue that might make us uncomfortable. And we don't address that depth, our level of depth, and also the level of depth in which we are being harmed and limited. We be able to really do groundbreaking work or innovative work to address our needs. And in order to do so, we have to not just see race in a vacuum.
And the same holds true when we're thinking about any one of our social identities as marginalized people. Folks who are queer might have lots of privilege because they're white. They might have less privilege if they are underemployed or unemployed. They might have even less privilege if they live with physical disabilities or have other ways of being limited in their life. We have all of these different intersectionalities that impact our level of privilege and our level of oppression. One of the things that we have to think about when we're talking about belonging versus fitting in is what are the additional hoops we are making people go through so that they can be part of community. And this gets back to our little exercise at the very beginning, unconscious bias. We're not often very aware of the things we say or the ways we interact. Sometimes we think we're being humorous and somebody gets offended and we're like, I didn't mean anything by it. And consciously, we probably don't. But it still has an impact. we live in a society where heteronormativity, notice the word norm, is assumed. It is assumed when my husband and I walk down the street that we're this little old Jewish couple, you know, sweet little grandparents. That is part of our truth, and there's so much else. Misogyny, which is the mechanism of patriarchy, of dominantly or historically, we think of misogyny as being applied just to women, keeping women out of the workplace, keeping women's income at 63 cents to the dollar of a man. But misogyny has direct impacts on queer folk, trans women more than any other, particularly Black trans women. It has an impact on non-binary folk. All of these things that we take as the norm might not be somebody else's truth. And that's where we start getting things a little confusing. You know, there's over the last 10, 15, 20 years, oh, those pronouns, why do we have to use these pronouns? And I'll tell you something, I had a huge learning curve with my own child. I'd already spent 40 years in queer rights work. My husband had been trans for a good 10 years at that point. And when our child came out as non-binary, we had our own homework to do because we all have our own assumptions about who somebody is. Those assumptions are based on our perceptions, not upon somebody else's reality. And the things we say and the hurdles we unconsciously put into someone's life create what are called microaggressions. Let's run that short video. It gives us a sense of what microaggressions feel like.
Are a problem. Oh, you're. For people who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem. Oh, you're so well spoken. Oh, just imagine instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite. Compliment. Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while, no, where are you really from? Cleveland. Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date.
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me? Grocery shopping. You know, it's for a reason.
I'm just saying that.
Commuting to work.
So when are you gonna have a baby?
Watching TV. Or just walking down the street with your partner. Tell you we're gay. Mosquitoes seem to pop up everywhere. I'm getting bit by mosquitoes every goddamn day.
Touch your hair.
Multiple times a day. It's fucking annoying. It seems like a huge overreaction to people who only get bit every once in a while.
It's just a mosquito bite. Who cares? Just another angry Black one.
Of course, beyond just being annoying, some mosquitoes carry truly threatening diseases that can mess up your life for years. Astrophysics? Maybe you should try this challenging major.
Wow. Dreams.
Another mosquitoes carry strings that can even kill you.
It looked like he was up to trouble, okay? I felt threatened.
So next time you think someone's overreacting, just remember, some people experience mosquito bites all the time. You're all so exotic. Wow. And by mosquito bites, we mean microaggressions.
We all do it. We all have unconscious biases. We all can slip into microaggressions. But how do we become more aware? How do we catch ourselves and each other? I'm going to open that up for conversation for a second here. When you see somebody saying some of these things, what do you do when you're in mixed company? Most of us just stay silent. because it doesn't impact us. Let's go to the next slide. At the heart of microaggressions is the tension between intent and impact. When my kiddo came out as non-binary, my intention was to understand. And so I had all of these questions about, well, you've always liked, makeup and so I'm saying I want to understand. In part, I'm deluding myself because I wanted my child to be the person I thought they were. The impact on my child was that the person who should have been the safest person for them to come out to wasn't there for them. When we say things where our intent isn't, egregious, we get flustered. Oh, I didn't mean anything by it. Some of my best friends are gay. Some of my best friends are. We deflect. Or we get defensive. My parents didn't have slaves. I don't have slaves. It's not my fault. Instead, what we as faith communities need to do is step into our humility to enter not safe space, because safe space is an overused deflection. It's like, oh, we're just not going to say anything because we don't want to offend anyone. We don't have to call people out. But what we do need to learn to do as faith communities is to call people in, invite people in. That means raising our awareness about what is being said in our community. Just as, one of the persons getting pricked by the mosquito said, ouch, we can say ouch on behalf of others. It becomes even more tender in our spiritual communities. Let's go to the next slide. And actually, so all of these repeated anxieties of, here I'm hearing this stuff again and again, are a form of trauma. And within faith communities, we have a particular form of trauma called spiritual wounding or religious trauma. And let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that we don't often think about is that religious wounding can impact anyone, not just queer folk, but anyone who has experienced religion being the tool of microaggressions, being told that, marriage between a man and woman is God's, God-given edict. Now, of course, most of the forefathers and foremothers in the Hebrew Testament are polygamous, not one man, one woman. And we can point to some specific, really deep, loving relationships between people of the same gender. So that argument never really holds water. But what happens with religious wounding is it ties into multiple other factors in our lived experience. We humans are mammals, and mammals by nature need connection, need companionship. We talk about infants or elderly having failure to thrive, which means they aren't getting the level of affection and love and care and unconditional presence that each one of us deserve and that the divine intends to have flow to each and every one of us. But what else happens for queer folk especially, also for people who are coming out of fundamentalists, but in the terms of this conversation, is when you are a young person who comes out, even in this day and age, 40% of all homeless youth are queer kids. because their family has used religion and used a very specific understanding of who the divine is and what the divine wants as a battering ram to tell this person that they are unworthy, that they are unlovable. And if you can't believe your family and your faith community, who can you believe? It has a deep impact on just about every queer person. You know, when we're talking about the damage done in this moment. Trevor Project did a survey in the last year or so with all of the political turmoil, talking about how 50% of all trans people, adults and kids, have experienced suicidal ideation. When that person has anyone who speaks to them, sees them, loves them, honors who they are as a image of the divine, that rate goes down to the normal rate in the society of about 4%. That's huge. And it's a gift that we in our spiritual communities should be making the norm, to see somebody, to let them know that they are welcome. What we often do in faith communities, though, is say we're welcome. We might have a picture of the LGBTQ group on our website of, you can belong to this group. Our doors are open. But do we make assumptions about people's relationship? Is, one of you the husband? Might be something that some people would say. Do you really love drag shows? The things that we do to create separation, those kinds of invasive. Have you had the surgeries? What surgeries have you had? All of these things create barriers, create an unwelcoming environment. There's a lot of reason why we end up having religious wounding. That all of us have been, in the same ways that we're in the white supremacy soup, we're in a Christo-heteronormative soup that has been developing over decades. Augustine, one of the fathers of the church, created the idea of original sin, the source of misogyny that is applied to women and queer folk, that supposedly in the Garden of Eden, Eve was the cause of the downfall of humanity. So therefore, women should not have a voice. Therefore, people who are embodied in female presenting bodies shouldn't be singing in churches. This is the things that we heard over the first millennia of Christianity. Jesus dined with eunuchs. He gave compassion to women of the night. That kind of unconditional love is what we are invited into, but it's not what we often see when churches are more focused on dogma than they are in the loving word of the divine. This was made even worse at the Spanish Inquisition. In 1492, Columbus didn't just sail the ocean blue. That was when Ferdinand and Isabella expelled all Muslims and Jews from the Iberian Peninsula. It was the beginning of otherizing. And it was in short order that they got the Pope to agree to the idea of the doctrine of discovery, that any lands that a white Christian explorer went to automatically belonged to the crown. It didn't matter that people of color were living in Africa, were living in South America, were living in North America. Because they weren't Christians, they were other. And their lands were forfeit, their lives were forfeit, all in the name of the church. It is what led to the creation of whiteness here in the United States in 1619, to create a barrier between Catholic Irish indentured servants and African slaves, to make them unable to partner with each other as they were trying to do to gain their civil rights. All of this history becomes part of us, and it influences how we move in the world. But for people who are queer, those messages end up meaning that they are separated from their God, they are separated from their family, they're separated from their sense of community. So how do we shift that? How do we move from being in a space of, yeah, you're welcome, but really don't, you don't have to flaunt it. You don't have to tell us what's going on in your life, but you can come and worship with us. For many congregations, that's considered welcome. What we have to explore is how to move from just saying somebody's welcome, from expecting them to fit in, as opposed to inviting them to the table where they belong, to the sense of belonging. So now we're going to break into two groups. The folks on this side of the room, you've got up on the wall over there, belonging. And the folks on this side of the room, you've got the word fitting in. I want you to take a couple of minutes. Let's take 5 minutes. And stream of thought. What does it mean to belong? What does it mean to fit in? What are examples in our own life and in our community that we can point to where that is happening or isn't happening? You can join into conversation with each other.
Okay, I'm just, these know those from good. Brandon, thanks for volunteering to go first. Why the circle?
You know, what comes to my mind right away, it's that illustration Larry said about Alaska. Larry did see like in Alaska, and he says it's where all the square pegs go that don't fit into round holes. And this is what I think is fitting in. And that is, what is it that we're offering that people come and find that they don't fit, you know, because they just very carefully said that we're not all square. And not all churches are round holes. So what can we do to our shape so that all shapes feel that they can fit in? So that's what came to my mind. And I just think that one word says opportunity. It was a new experience. So, you know, and I think of a child, you know, taking shapes and trying to, you know, fit it into the plastic game that you put the shape into that shape. So we have the opportunities so that people find a place where they fit. But it means that it can't be a structure that doesn't allow fitting. That's my.
I think when people make personal contact with you.
My experience, I've worked in hospice and hospital. And when I was stationed or in everybody at the hospital had nice little rainbow flags on their IDs. And I've worked in both situations. But I had to choose not to put a rainbow flag on my.
There's a part of belonging that I think comes to.
I was going out and
like,
people's
you are
homes
no longer there.
as a process of chat. And I didn't want that to feel that conversation, you know, and that was my ability to fit in. And it was bad enough for people.
Some lots.
People assumed I was Jewish. You know, one person asked me, can you pray Jesus with me? And I said, yes, I can, type of stuff. So, I mean, I'd rather kind of have that be part of the conversation. I didn't want to, I
Where
mean,
you fit in.
knowing that everybody in the
Where you
hospital is,
feel like you
it was kind of unity, diversity,
It's
equality type of thing, you know, we
And when
acknowledge
you go
purpose.
with belonging,
It made,
it's
I
about
think, made everybody kind of feel
what you
welcome.
bring to the
But it was just
So
not a
when
purpose
we
for me to
ask
have to try to explain myself away from.
make
That I
somebody feel
didn't
like
want
they
to
can fit
have
in,
as part of my
versus them
conversation,
to
becoming to do with
be
some
like
of
us.
spirituality.
But if we want them to feel a sense of belonging,
Feelings of
then we need
this whole
to
condition type of stuff.
show
So that was my way of fitting in
them
into one setting, because
It's different.
it's, I could answer the, you know,
Is
the Jesus praying me thing, but I did not want that to be part of the conversation.
by
And that was my way of fitting
showing great
into.
respect.
I'm like going, yeah, if you come to the hospital, we can have that conversation,
Those
but
things.
I don't want
and things
to
that
homes.
which could be completed.
Let's take one more minute to wrap
It's
up.
different going both direction for me, type of stuff. I didn't want to,
What I was asked to
I
be.
didn't want to take that into their whole type of stuff.
Suddenly. I
It was much like I was willing to, but if they came to the hospital, then they had to go. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I, am thinking systemic,
People would be saying.
particularly about Westminster or any other.
And we want to know what that means.
And I'm thinking about
That creates the
our
because it's no longer those people.
George recession. And I asked that question because of two examples. One is a couple who wanted to get married at a Presbyterian church in my hometown. And the minister would not do it because they were not members. And it was, so they were the other, because they were not members.
Fitting in.
So one of the partners said, well,
Excuse me, I senses.
as a young person, and
Okay,
now
this
they
is
were
not a
being.
jigsaw puzzle.
The second was, is a woman.
There's a
Portland,
hole
whose
there
son was
that
killed.
is
Not
not filled by
That's unfortunate.
someone,
So
and, but I
in,
don't fit
in
in.
their,
Um,
I
it's
mean, in their
almost like,
church, he was, they were not allowed to have a funeral
But,
or the clergy.
the idea that all things that are
It
being,
was not amended.
there has to be.
So-
Let's bring it to a conclusion and come back to our seats.
um, Spot where I can
Like
be,
a written policy.
and that is different, difficult
Not about
for people because they,
ceremonies, sacraments.
let's say,
So
don't
that's my conclusion.
fill all those.
Okay, let's come back into the larger group. So what arose in conversation? Tell me about fitting in. What does that look like? What does fitting in look like and feel like? Who has to do the heavy lifting in fitting in? And what about belonging? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Who has to do the heavy lifting there? Your thoughts?
Kind of belonging was, you had to have a common, sometimes a common theme or common interest. And to have a personal, to actually make a personal contact versus just being sitting in a room with a bunch of strangers.
Feeling valued, that your individual value is something that is truly welcomed and needed and loved, that you as an individual are loved.
Yes.
Whether you fit in, I think Kim, you were trying to say something about a puzzle. Even if your piece doesn't fit that spot, the puzzle's not complete without you.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. What happens when we make people fit in?
I guess I'm struggling with this because we talk about when we make them fit in, it seems like that's otherizing. What makes us the ones who are so special that we need to recognize how privileged we are so that they can fit in? It just still seems like an otherizing thing to me. And when I go to these workshops and trainings over the years, whether it's the step over the line or look how cool you are versus how much pain other people are in. And then we do the intersectionality thing, which seems to me to be better. It still seems like rather than doing a strength-based assessment, like what's great about being gay? And what gifts do you bring? What's great about being white? You've got this privilege, so now you can fight for the underdog in a different way as long as you're not speaking for them. But even in every one of these things I've been to, it seems like there's a privileged class and you need to know how privileged you are. And so then you can help the others fit in. It
I
doesn't
hear
seem
I
as-
hear what you're saying. It's the difference between
Like we're
focusing.
we're a church and we have to help them. We don't.
It's not about help.
Republicans fit in here.
It's actually not about helping. It's about
Okay.
making space. So an example. How many queer people are part of your leadership, your board, your teachers, your clergy? Do they see themselves as part of the community? How are your bathrooms identified? Do you create space where somebody who is of a gender other than the one that they were born with can feel safe going to the bathroom in your building? It's these very specific ways that we either create welcome or expect somebody to fit into our system. So for instance,
I don't get the power system.
well, every community has its own culture. When somebody moves into a culture, we tend to expect them to conform to that culture. That's fitting in. If that culture does not give them cues that says, oh, I can be all of who I am here, they're going to be restricted.
I'm still hearing the us and them rather than
Be,
help them fit in rather than help us fit in or.
when we think about how somebody else is made welcome, we widen the welcome for ourselves. If we're giving space for somebody to be wholly who they are, we're giving ourselves permission to be wholly who we are. When my husband and then my child each came out as part of the trans continuum and became fully who they were, it gave me permission to say, I'm tired of working for interfaith organizations and supporting other clergy doing things. It's time for me to walk my talk, to be fully who I know myself to be, which is a minister. When we create atmospheres, it's not about us and them. It's about lifting the whole community up. Because just as Jesus invited everyone to the table, made everyone welcome, and when disciples tried to otherize others at the table, when Pharisees tried to otherize people who he went to their table, he said, they are no different than me. I see them. I make space for them. I am inviting all of us to the table. And that's what each of us as people of spirit need to do. It's not otherizing. It's about widening that welcome and saying, when I lift you up, when I make you an image of the divine, I can see the divine in me more strongly. I can live into my own sacred spirit. When I make space for you, to not have to make yourself small to fit into what is the expected norm.
I guess I still don't get it because I'm making space for you. It still feels like I'm a special person that is doing I'm hearing you say when I lift you up. I don't get why I get to be so cool that I get to lift someone up.
We all
rather than They
do.
could lift me up. 'Cause
We all do.
We don't. want that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Dina has ALS, it affects her voice.
Okay.
So she's written something and
Thank you.
so she says that fitting in may have to do with the community examining policies and actions that invite people into the main piece of our community. Feels like belonging happens when we intentionally invite an open and deeper relationship with all of us. It's ongoing opportunity to be part of Jesus's community.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
I would say, I'm gonna add my own thing.
Yes.
I think fitting in, to me, feels like, it's all on. And I think we all experience that, it's not just gay people.
Right.
Either by the clothes we feel like we have to wear,
Mm-hmm.
or females having to kind of fit a male something in the workplace. Fitting in is sort of on the person to make the concessions. And belonging is on all of us and not assuming. I think of those mosquito bites, a lot of those comments were just sort of assumptions. That we make
Exactly.
As opposed to asking questions. And I think just someone said having a conversation with someone, asking them about their experience. I feel like I belong when somebody takes an interest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When we expect someone to fit in, they're doing the heavy lifting to conform. When we create a space of belonging, we become the body of Christ. And I know you all have to get into service. So with that, is there any last question or last
There's
comment?
a comment online.
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah, Linda, do you want to read your comment? Linda Buckley?
Okay, just that I said I have a gender fluid kiddo who I invited to our church women's retreat one year, and then I realized I didn't know how to make that women's be inclusive of non-binary gender fluid people. I don't have an here.
That's a really good example of the difference between fitting in belonging. Do we say that our groups are strictly gendered by one or the other of the prescribed genders, or do we say this event is open to? Do we include stories of differently organized families in Sunday school? Do we lift up each other to be their full embodiment of spirit?
With that, I think we should thank Reverend Rivka Gewurz for really fine and enlightening presentation.
I'll stick around for a moment if anybody has specific questions they want to come.
Dina has one more.
And just
Okay.
about a comment and just a short comment about next week. There is no next week for adult ed, so we'll be back in September.
Thanks.
Her final question was just if you have a book or two that we might read or study going forward.
Sure, I didn't bring a biblio with me today, but I can send it to Tom and
Yeah.
Elena and we'll get it out to folks. Okay.
Yes.